Lately, this show's devoted a fair amount of space to political Islam. I guess you could say we're going to be talking a little bit about political Christianity. Dateline Strasbourg and the European Parliament Tuesday, where the Pope got a rousing welcome and then proceeded to, you could say, roast the EU.
The great ideas which once inspired Europe seem to have lost their attraction, only to be replaced by the bureaucratic technicalities of its institutions.
Yes, Pope Francis described a Europe prey to rising nationalism, insensitive to the plight of migrants trying to reach its shores, and more generally, haggard, as he put it, a grandmother that's no longer fertile and vibrant. This wake-up call, the latest surprise to come from the first non-European pope in more than a millennium. And it's in stark contrast to others on the continent who also claim to espouse Christian values, like the French far-right's Marine Le Pen, or much of the Russian Orthodox Church, which has seemed to work hand in glove with Vladimir Putin's new Russian nationalism. By the way, that call for great ideas also coming from economists. One day after the OECD called for bold moves to kickstart anemic growth that could drag the entire world economy down if it hasn't solved. The answer coming this Wednesday from the new president of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, unveiling a €315 billion investment plan, enough to revive the European spirit. How can the current crop of politicians in Brussels reclaim the momentum? Today in the France 24 debate, we're talking about the Pope's wake-up call to Europe. With us, Father Aidan Troy of Paris's St. Joseph Catholic Church. Thank you for being with us. Also joining us, Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet, whose columns are penned on the website of the Nouvel Observateur and Le Plus, the Nouvel Observateur's interactive website.
Hello, François.
Thanks for being with us as well. We're also joined by Justin Smith, academic, and you can read his columns in the International New York Times, and Bruno Verken of the French Conservative Christian Democratic Party. Thank you for being with us here on France 24. The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter. Our hashtag F24Debate. The last time a pope went to Strasbourg, there was still a wall in Berlin. It was 1988. John Paul II told the European Parliament the continent was a beacon of civilization. That was then, this is now.
Despite a larger and stronger union, Europe seems to give the impression of being somewhat elderly and haggard, feeling less and less a protagonist in a world which frequently regards it with aloofness, mistrust, and even, at times, suspicion. In addressing you today, I would like, as a pastor, to offer a message of hope and encouragement to all the citizens of Europe.
All right, despite a larger and stronger Europe, Europe seems to give the impression of being somewhat elderly and haggard. Were you surprised by this speech, Father Joy?
I was surprised in the sense of the tone he took was one that I wouldn't have expected. There's no use in me saying, well, I knew he was going to say this. But I was encouraged by what he was saying, because as I understand what he was saying globally, overall, in his speech was, he was trying not only to give a wake-up call, but he was also trying to inject a big element of hope and sort of saying that, you know, there is a lot that still can be done that's very, very good. I think in that sense, I'm quite pleased with what he said. Now, how it'll all play out in the end, of course, I don't know.
And he seemed to talk of the need for great ideas that aren't there anymore.
Yeah, I think the way he looks at it is, you see, from a very, very wide perspective. And he said himself, he was asked on the plane on the way home about, you know, his political views, and was this very political? And he said, I take my lead from Scripture, the tradition, and the hope that I have. And he sort of, I think, was trying to translate what would be a very, very wide vision into the thing of 28 countries, these millions and millions of people, and saying, yeah, we need to think a lot about a lot of things.
You're saying he drew his inspiration from Scripture, but would you have seen his predecessor, Pope Benedict, issuing this same call?
Well, different, you know, I was going to irreverently say different horses for different courses, but that wouldn't be exactly right to say different people have different way. I don't think Benedict would have spoken in the same colloquial type of way, in a way. I mean, to mention a grandmother, and no disrespect to grandmothers, you know, to mention how aging like Europe seems to have got, he takes very, very powerful ordinary words and applies them in situations that you just mightn't expect.
René Vercaen, do you agree with the message that he put out?
I took his message as a report of astonishment. You know, when people join companies after a few days, 100 days, we ask them, okay, what do you think of our company, how it works here? And this was very surprising because we would have expected him to talk about poverty, immigration. He comes from Argentina. And basically, we can take his strong, tough call as, hey guys, you're sitting on a treasure here and you don't see it and you have no message for the world. And however, you have things to say because the world's challenges around the economy, around environment, culture, anthropology as well, you have something specific to say. And you're just staying at the level of procedural democracy, you know, and don't bring anything new. And you have a treasury with your culture, with your multipolarity.
But he was unequivocal in saying Europe has to do more to help those migrants trying to cross the Mediterranean.
Sure, and find an innovative solution. Of course, we cannot welcome all migrants. When they are there, they are human beings, and as human beings, we need to help them. But what do we do to help these countries develop where they are? We know that there are plenty of for example, many doctors in France come from these countries. We lack doctors in France, but we also attract a lot of these people, and probably they would be better off staying in their countries in order to relieve the health there. And there are innovative solutions, and this is why he said, you're not creative any longer, you shrink because there's a pressure of Asia, because there's your economy is slowing down. Maybe not everything is on economy, you know. We are globally very wealthy in Europe. Huh? Everybody has enough to eat, has a lodging, even if there are worrying issues about growing poverty, particularly with children and fragile people.
Let's read one reaction coming into us on Facebook from Monique. She says, surely the Vatican is willing to help pay for holding centers, talking about those migrants, aid and patrols then. That is supposed to be their thing, isn't it? Helping the desperate. So, because obviously one of the big issues when it comes to those migrants trying to cross the Mediterranean is who pays for it. Justin Smith,
yes.
Let me ask you about that. And also about these remarks he made about the absence of mutual support within the European Union runs the risk of encouraging solutions which fail to take into account the human dignity of immigrants.
Sure. Well, a few points to start out. You mentioned political Christianity. Now, my neighbor here highlighted that for Pope Francis, it's a question of following Scripture. And in that sense, I think it's crucial to not see the Pope's discourse to the European Parliament as political in a strict sense. He's not talking to colleagues. He's representing an institution that has some pretty profound commitments. And one of these profound commitments is to protecting human dignity. That is to say that anyone whose human dignity cannot be respected in the place they come from has an absolute right to seek their human dignity elsewhere.
But what's more political than him taking a dig at the, quote, bureaucratic technicalities
Sure.
of Europe's institutions?
But what I mean to say is that he is maybe defending a principle, that is the right to pursue your human dignity as a refugee or as a migrant, that European parliamentarians might feel they could never possibly realize. Now, this was obviously a political intervention on some level, but the Pope is following Scripture, which is properly understood, you might say, and arguably in a way Benedict didn't understand it, far more radical than any member of Parliament is able to really adapt him or herself to in a practical way.
Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet?
I think this speech was a kind of a leftist speech by French contemporary standards. He was very much against the way Europe is constructed now, with bureaucracy and technocracy instead of...
You saw it as a left-wing speech?
Yeah, sort of. I mean, who talks about immigration now like that? Even our prime minister doesn't talk about immigration like this. He's the only one who says, his famous quote was, who is crying for those people dying in the Mediterranean? Who is crying for them? That's the real question, not who is paying for them. The real question is, who is crying for them? I mean, they are dying on the sea. I mean, they are human beings. And he is the only one to say that. Why? Why is the Pope, I mean, a Catholic man, a priest, not a secular person, why is he the only one to say that? I mean, that's the only true question now, and I think he's really appalled by the fact that he is the only one to talk about that. And it's a real question. I think he's a good Pope. Why? Because he's really in tune with the time we face.
Mm-hmm. I've asked you this before, Father Troy. Is he in tune with his own church?
I think this is a very, very, very fundamental question. I just want to go back one tiny bit. I think the thing of the immigration is hugely important. And to that extent, he'd certainly be in tune on that one. Because don't forget, he went down to Lampedusa and he stood there and he watched and he saw the peace of sea. And I think that's why he could say, we don't want the Mediterranean to become a large cemetery. And he celebrated Mass on the bark of a boat that had, you know, lost a terrible lot of people out of it. Now, I think that gives you, to use a probably not a very great phrase, like street credibility. Now, when he comes back into his own household of the faith, I said this before and I'd say it again, I think there is a very healthy development that he has encouraged by way of saying, say what you're going to say it strongly, and don't be afraid. Now, at the beginning of a synod of bishops, for him to say that, and I don't want to mention other popes because, as I say, each in their own way, but I thought that was outstandingly courageous. And the consequence of that is, it'd be like if you said to the four of us before we started, nobody's to disagree, we'd have a very dull time. And he said, you know, he said, disagree honestly, disagree whatever way you want to. And I believe that that's how the truth eventually and the health, not only of Europe, but of the Catholic Church will come.
All right, the papal magic not working on everyone, like Eve on Facebook, who says, from now on, every single migrant coming to the EU should be sent directly to the Vatican, where the Pope and his bishops can take care of them. Fact is a lot of people don't want these migrants.
Yeah, I absolutely. I was in Dublin this week at a meeting and I was following developments both at home and in the UK, and there's a very, very big debate, even to the thing of some countries saying we might leave Europe over this because of the internal politics thing. I take the point completely. Somebody, though, has to post the thing. I take the point, the best the Pope has done in the last few weeks is to say we'll build some showers in St. Peter's Square for those who sleep rough. But I do take the point that you look at this very wealthy institution, then you look at the migrants, and I think it's been already said here, we're not going to solve this by just saying, let's open the gates to everybody. But the point he's making, I think, is that when it comes to it, the fundamental point for Europe or for anywhere, and this does come from Scripture, is the person. Now, I do think that this, if this gets a debate going, how responsibly can these countries of Europe deal with this?
Bruno Verken, the members of your political party, how do they feel about these migrants? Should we bring them in?
When they are there, you know, when you have the migrant there, you're obliged to help him. There's no way. If you go to Calais, they are there. They are trying to go to the UK and they are going in the hotels and trying to sleep somewhere, eat somewhere. And so clearly all the people who help them when they are there need to be helped. The question is, what do we do in a globalized world where it's easy to take a flight, a boat, even if it's a boat that sinks? What do we do to have these people being able to stay home? And when none of these migrants migrate for fun. I mean, it's they go in Northern Europe, it's cold, they have no jobs, they are far from their families. It's not a pleasure for any of them. Okay. At the same time, we have to recognize that we have a wealth system and social system that can attract them. Okay. Now, this said, the only way, and this is why when he talks about human ecology, is to have a global view at that, and the global view at the issue is not to isolate immigration from sharing of wealth. You know, and what do we do in Europe? We have a lot of surpluses. What do we do to share them with these countries, to help these countries develop? Europe has had a lot of influence at the time of, Christophe Colomb and in conquering the world. There was some not so beautiful things always, but we have a project. We can have a project.
Bruno, you're taking the long view on this, but
Yeah.
right now there's an emergency, which is, these boatloads of migrants. Some just picked off of Greece yesterday, and for those people, do you bring them in? Do you take them in?
Well, you don't put them back at the sea, otherwise you have a vast cemetery. So you welcome them in camps, okay, and you don't let them in the street, because if you go in Calais today, the situation is quite worrying for the inhabitants of this city, and I don't know whether it's sustainable. And then, of course, you make in sure that the social system don't play an attractive role, okay? But if you don't address the topic of sharing wealth and having these people help when they are home, you will not. We are no longer in the 20th century. These people can come.
All right. The Pope, part of his message was about migrants. Part of it was about immigrants, which is not the same thing. Justin Smith, he talked about taking into account the human dignity of immigrants, and that if the European Union doesn't do it, it'll contribute to slave labor and to social tensions.
Well, that's just a basic element of Catholic social teaching, that you have to recognize the human dignity of the individual rather than looking at them as a so-called illegal immigrant, or what better, an irregular migrant. So again, I think the Pope is trying to call Europe to live up to an ideal for which there are indeed a lot of practical difficulties, that politicians might not understand how they can meet these high expectations. But what I think the commenter, the person who wrote in, for example, fails to understand is that the Catholic Church is not a state. It's not looking to represent the interests of a particular group of citizens. It's looking at this issue from a global perspective. And at the global perspective, there's the huge problem of tremendous wealth inequality and what's almost becoming a global feudal system. And in much the same way that 700 years ago, feudal lords would not have wanted to recognize that their position in the world is not God-given. Similarly, today, members of first world countries with all of the social benefits that brings have a lot of trouble understanding that this is just pure chance, pure hazard. And in that respect, what Pope Francis is calling on people to recognize is that we need to look beyond that dint of circumstance to global humanity.
All right, and of course, when the Pope addresses a European institution, there are those who question whether or not it's appropriate for a man of the cloth to be doing so. Bodhi on Facebook saying it's 2014 and we're still listening to a man dressed as a Jedi Knight and who talks to invisible friends. So there you see, so not everybody agrees with the Pope addressing the European Parliament. We're going to pick up on how far the Pope's message carries when we come back. You're watching the France 24 debate.